Alright, now let me put the default value is equal to 10 back here and proceed further with one more chapter which is very important, and that is dealing with asynchronous tests. So far what we have seen is pure functionality. They are executed in sequence and give the expected results. But assume that you want to test a function which is impure. That is, it does not return the result immediately but takes time, like an AJAX call. In that case, how will you handle the testing is the topic of our discussion. Let me quickly add a component which makes an AJAX call to a mock REST API. So I'm going to create a file. I'll say users.js. So I'm going to import React, the use state and use effect from React. Then I'll say const users is equal to, and the arrow function, I'll open the curly bracket, and here I'll say return, open a parenthesis and pressing enter. And at the end, let me just say export default users. Now here I'm going to say const users and set users is equal to use state, and inside that I will have an array. Now inside this return, I'll say division and unordered list UL. Now let me put use effect, and I'm going to use the fetch API. So the URL we are going to refer is JSON placeholder and users, and you see the data in the browser that we have the username and email. That's what we are going to show. Let me copy this URL and let's get back to the coding, and here I paste it. I'll say .then response.json, again .then will receive the data here, and that we are going to update in the set users method, so that will update the users state. Alright, so and let me put a comma and an array. You already know what use effect is, this argument is, and the fetch API as well. So not discussing it again here. Now let's go back to the UL. Now inside this I'm going to use the map loop, and straight away I'm pasting the code. So users.map, we have the individual user passed, and there is an li which actually plots the username and email. So that's it. This is the asynchronous code. Let's go to the app.js and let me import the users component. And just below this counter, let me also say users, and let's check the output. So you see that the username and email data is displayed as a list item. Now comes the testing part for this component. So let's create test for this asynchronous component. First thing, I will create a separate test file for it. I will add users.test.js, and the moment I add, you can see the test failed as this new file does not have any test. So let me just go to the existing test file and copy these two lines. And paste it in this user test. Now let's also import the component. I'll say import users from /users. Now I'm going to write the test. So the first thing I will say is test. Let's say checking data retrieval in list item. And I'll open the brackets. First thing, let's render the component. Now I can say const list element is equal to screen dot get by role list item. Now this get by role method, what it does is it checks for the type of the item, whether you have the input, you have the button, or you have the list item. The test we are going to check is if we have list item in the component, that means the data is populated, the data is successfully retrieved. But if there is no list item, that means there is an issue with the data fetching. So get by role will help you to check whether there is a list item or not. But in that case, it will try to execute it immediately, and we want that it should wait for the data fetching. So for that, instead of using get methods, we will use find methods. As I mentioned in the very beginning, that find methods return promise, and that's exactly we want here. I will not write this get by role. Instead, I can say find all by role. Now the next step is we need to check that do we have the list item available on the page or not. One easier way is I'll say expect the list element dot not, because this list element is going to be an array, so I can say to have length 0. That means if this list element array has length 0, then the data is not fetched. If it is not having length 0, that means the data is successfully retrieved. But when I save, you can see it does not perform what we expect. And the reason is that this find all by role does return a promise, and we want that the process should wait for the data retrieval. For the very same thing, I'm going to put an await here. And also because you are using await in a function, you ought to use async. So here I just say async. Now let's just save this, and you can see that the test is successfully done. So this is how you can deal with the asynchronous processes. Do remember, you have to use find methods. You have find all by role, find by test ID, and various other methods which you can use when you have asynchronous processes.